Peter, you recently posted the following line from Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, and the line was this: "A wise man should always enter those paths trodden by great men and imitate those who have been most excellent, so that if one's own virtue does not match theirs, at least it will have the smell of it." Now, I get the feeling, having known you, we've talked together, we've been part of various clubs together, that you focus on greatness, the highest in human achievements, be it in literature, in art, in culture. So let's start by talking about greatness, the importance of greatness, where you find greatness, why you thought this quote from Machiavelli was so important. Greatness, Peter.
Well, I think this is a very, very large topic, and it may be a little bit difficult to get a hold on of where to begin. I guess I'll say that greatness is something that I think in our society is something of a taboo, right? I mean, there's of all the sort of concepts that that might be considered viewed with a great deal of suspicion, or rejected as illusory. I think greatness is definitely one of them, and I think, of course. But then on the other hand, I mean, much of the humanities itself. I mean, as a discipline, you could say until pretty recently was the study of greatness, right? Of the highest achievements, the most profound works of art and philosophy, the most memorable expressions of the human spirit. And so, I mean, as a humanist, I of course, am very much drawn to understanding the achievements of the past. But I think, in sort of more philosophical terms, I think greatness as an idea relates very much to our capacity, I think, to get outside of ourselves, to see life and other people from a different perspective. And also, I think it mounts an implicit challenge to the way we think of ourselves and how we experience the world, right? It reminds us that there are other ways of seeing things, and also I think it encourages us to think differently, to try to put ourselves outside of our usual patterns of thinking and our general habits. And then also, greatness is something that emerges in times of crisis. And of course, I mean, it's often, as it often happens, I mean, people will rise to greatness who were not really expected to add up to much. I mean, I think that's a very, common phenomenon in history. And so I think it gives us models, for dealing with, challenging ordeals and crises that I think whenever we enter a difficult period of life, whether as a society or as an individual, I mean, what is it that we often do is that we try to find examples of people who, have gone through similar experiences and perhaps, of course, met the challenge successfully, or at least dealt with it in a way that managed to avoid disaster. And so I think it's a very important thing to study. And I think it's a very, I think in a way the humanities kind of cut themselves off at their own feet by abandoning this concept and viewing it with and treating it with a great deal of suspicion, as something that is too idealistic, too childish, immature, but I think ultimately I think it's connected to our highest aspirations as well as our strongest desires. That a society that doesn't believe in greatness, I think, is one where people do not sacrifice themselves for truth, and also where people don't die of love. Right? I think to lack this concept is to live in a kind of a sad twilight, where nothing really touches people very deeply, and yet at the same time, people become more and more prone to nervous, mental illnesses, right? Where they're easily influenced by by things in the media, and where people's responses are characterized by overreaction.
You started off, a wonderful description of it. I love the language. You started off by saying at one point that greatness has become taboo. It's a very interesting idea. I wonder, just to try to unpack that, what has replaced it? Is it authenticity, or is it something else? And how do you feel about the idea that perhaps greatness still exists, but now there's a variety of greatnesses? So Nietzsche is still great, and Dostoevsky is still great, but people have come along and challenged canons of what means to be great, and they've sort of created their own greatness. So is it the rise of democracy has produced a democratization of greatness, or do you genuinely think that there's a taboo nature to excellence?
I mean, I think generally speaking, the idea of equality, I think, is antithetical to the idea of greatness.
Yeah.
So I think within democracy itself, there's a kind of a limit on what people can actually experience, I think, and also, but also achieve as well in many cases. I'm trying to go back to some of the question. I guess the earlier part of your question was it.
What has replaced greatness?
Oh, well. Yeah, as you point out, I think authenticity, certainly during the 1960s, I think authenticity replaced it, or was one of the terms I think that had the most influence in terms of displacing greatness. And of course, this was all part of like the kind of the youth rebellion of the time, right? That one wanted to, the rebels of that period wanted to throw off the sort of the burdens of culture, right? The burdens that their society had placed on them to discover who they really were. And they certainly produced a lot of great music and also poetry, during that period. But at the same time, I can't help but think of it as resulting in a kind of a downward movement, where people were no longer. I think it sort of winds up sort of coinciding with the general loss of belief. I mean, and by that I mean not just religious belief, but I think in the capacity to believe, for people to believe in history. And I think that's a key part of I think the sort of the situation, the plight that we find ourselves in today, that we don't really believe in history. I think we believe in historical forces, but we don't really believe in historical personalities. That people can that people can have like a great influence or leave a kind of an enduring and powerful mark. And I think this is also part of the natural, dynamic of democracy, that people's visions generally become set on more immediate things. Their sense of, their time horizon also shrinks, so that their lives are defined more by thinking in terms of, they might think a few years ahead, but they don't think, decades or centuries ahead and so life becomes much more, sort of ordinary, but also disciplined and orderly, I suppose, and so. But as for people actually creating their own canons, I think only a great writer can create a canon. I mean, in that if a great writer emerges, one thing that he does or she does is to make us reconsider, the literary canon.
Yeah.
And so to trace, the sort of the structure or patterns by which he or she emerged. And so whenever you have like a writer achieving some kind of breakthrough, it prompts us to reconsider, the past, right? And so, of course, I mean, there is a kind of greatness that exists, within the canon. I mean, I think it's, very, I think it's a question that one has to approach through this issue of intelligence, right? I mean, a person who might be writing a book about a literary canon, is likely not going to be as inspired or as intelligent as Shakespeare or Tolstoy, right? There is a certain kind of limit, I think, in terms of like I think often it is the case that criticism, is. I mean, certainly there have been great critics, but in general, I think there is a pretty big difference, I think, between like literary artists and those who write about the literary art or try to make sense of culture. But I think that's natural. I mean, that's I think the work of critics, when they do have a deep understanding and appreciation of the past, is indispensable.
Where do you see greatness, Peter? So I mentioned a couple of names like Dostoevsky or Nietzsche. You said Tolstoy, Shakespeare. There's a couple of names that have come up naturally in the conversation. I'm going to ask Yonsei as well if you see greatness in modern society today. But where do you find greatness? Where do you see it? Art, literature, movies.
I mean, I prefer to leave that as leave that to history. I mean, it's easy for us, I think, to look into the past and appreciate great works of art, but. Yeah. But I think it's another issue to look around and within one's present, to find examples. I mean, I would say that there are a lot of talented people, working in different art forms today. But I think perhaps it could be connected, I think, to the sort of the decline in religious faith as well, which is generally the sort of the capacity for a person to really believe in something, which is to say which is connected to a person's ability to devote himself or herself to a project, and and we don't live in that kind of society where this kind of devotion and commitment generally is encouraged. I mean, one really needs, I think, to search very hard, for examples of this. And then I think also greatness is a category that is very much, I think, connected with upheaval, chaos. Wars and catastrophes.
Sorry to interrupt you here. Can you think of any examples of people that rose to greatness in the times of crisis? Because you mentioned this idea earlier. My mind immediately went to Winston Churchill, who's a figure that thrived in wartime, and then as soon as peace was achieved, he was kicked out and things like this. Can you think of any people that achieved greatness through chaos?
Well, I think certainly the history of politics is I think full of such examples. Of course, there are times when such figures do not appear, and the country then or people then suffers tremendously, as a result. But certainly, I guess when we think about a crisis, we will like a world war, right? There will be greatness, right? But that's also, I think, the price that we pay for it. That in order for there to be greatness, millions of people, have to suffer.
Because greatness is this elevation, and your association with religion or something beyond, something transcendental, is interesting. And when you go that far up, by dint of that elevation going up, you're creating the same journey downwards, perhaps, that by having such greatness, there also must be such darkness. If you have goodness, you have evil. And I think Carl Jung would talk about this, that to be so high, remember that the roots must go by dint so low. So greatness only exists when we have both of these two poles.
I think it was Tolstoy who said that happy periods are the blank pages of history.
Yeah.
And that we are living through a kind of a period of vacation, I think, which seems to be coming to an end, fortunately or unfortunately. But I think that the argument against greatness, I think, resides in a kind of love of peace, order, and stability. Right. That I think it's one could argue that that greatness is something worth sacrificing if it means that millions of people can live peaceful and stable and orderly lives.
My mum would often say to me, no news is good news. If I didn't phone her for a while, she was happy because there was peace and stability and things were going right. Yonsei, you don't have to be very deep on this answer, but like as a young woman in Korea, do you see greatness? Do you see greatness in media or music or art or things around you? Is it?
I think that in friendships or like love of family or loved ones, that makes people experience greatness for once in their life, because we are supposed to like do things for us because we have to survive in this world, but the love or the adoring emotion makes us do more than one per person. So I think that makes us experience like beyond ourselves, because that is love or that is affection, but it cannot be really explained through scientific reasons, I think.
I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I think, like love is the means by which ordinary people can experience greatness.
Through other people. And you were saying about the empathy and seeing ourselves in other people. And I believe, that's when we get out of this sort of neoliberal, my life, my journey, my profit, my benefit, my story, and we see it in other people, which is a wonderful thing. You were saying, I was trying to think myself about where do I see greatness in modern society, and I was thinking, well, maybe Daeum Kutsia or something like that as a writer, because now we talk about things that are popular. Something is judged or something makes the news because it's look how many millions of views this has and look how popular this is. And we're never stopping and saying, is this great or not? We're saying, this is desirable or this is popular. Sometimes it's popular because it's been popular. You mentioned that we're coming to the end of an age or the start of an age. We're in a sort of buffering period of history now. You seem to have a good sense of the world, Peter. How would you describe our current era? What kind of world are we living in 2024?
Well, I think we're living in a world where a lot of things are kind of played out or are currently playing themselves out. I mean, the most industrialized countries have a terrible debt crisis, right, that they can't get out of. I think culturally, there really hasn't been much that is new in the realm of the arts, and then a lot of our politics, I think, are also kind of in a sort of a zombie state. Like, we're in a society that is, kind of recycling things and forgetting about the fact that certain goals had actually already been achieved, right? In order for us to be, to maintain or sort of induce anger or some sort of potent emotion in ourselves. So I think it's a very difficult time in that regard. I mean, it's very hard for us to find our bearings, and I think like it's again what you say about the power of the popular. I think also what reflects an abdication of judgment. The people are no longer as willing to ask, well, is it really good, and what are the standards that I should be using to determine the worth of some kind of statement or song or even like political issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, I look to Oswald Spengler, who wrote, the Decline of the West. He distinguished a culture from civilization, and a culture reflects the creative drive of a people. The way that what motivates it to create a certain way of life and then build certain institutions, and civilization is Spengler's word for when all these when the potential of a people has been completely played out, right? And I think we're in that stage of this. I think it's a process that's proven, I think, to be perhaps a bit longer than some of us might have expected. But I think our civilization is what has run out of new places to go.
Will we find new ones? Obviously, we can't predict. I mean, Hegel and Marx, they would all say similar things, that we can't see the future, but something will come that is unpredictable and imperceivable by us at the moment. Do you have sort of like a cyclical view of history? I'm thinking of Thomas Cole's paintings, or this rise and fall of nations, that you go up the steps in wooden sandals and you come down the other side in velvet slippers type thing. We've got comfortable, we'll sort of push it into despondency and debauchery, and then the next generations will have to raise it up again.
Well, I think there's a great deal of truth to the cyclical view, but at the same time, I think there are always novel elements. Yeah. I think societies can collapse in different ways, and they can recover, I think, in different ways. But I think in at these times one looks to I think it's very helpful to study history because, by studying history one can be aware of the things that are missing in our society, and it's often through what is missing in a society that that the next period of history will be shaped, right? And that these missing elements will take on a far greater importance.
I've always liked the expression, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. Because there are similarities, but never something that is exactly the same. Because of technological developments and everything else, there is also a love of nostalgia these days, these kind of Y2K vibes and 90s fashion and this music. And young people today are sort of looking at the past. For them, for us, it's our childhood maybe, but they're looking at the past and going, that's quite interesting, rather than looking towards the future. So during the 60s and 70s, we were doing Star Trek and Star Wars and this future that we're going to build. Whereas today, have people switched to the past? Is the past more attractive than the future?
Well, I think the past can serve as material, for creating a new future. I guess as for Star Wars, I think Star Wars is very much a kind of a mythical tale, pulled from the past.
A long time ago in a galaxy far away. It's Yennale, isn't it?
Yeah, albeit with different weapons or something like that. And Star Trek, I think, is kind of an interesting attempt to make the progressive vision last into the future. So perhaps it's less of so it doesn't represent the kind of the otherness, I think, that a truly that a very energetic leap into the of the imagination would produce. But I think a lot of things that are happening, I think perhaps that that what has been neglected, I think, in our high-tech materialistic society is the spiritual dimension. And I would say that it's the spiritual aspects of life, I think, that will become more and more important, especially as we enter into a more unpredictable and chaotic period.
Can you say something more about the spiritual aspect or the necessity of it? I think it was, who did the fence? I've forgotten his name. Said that when people don't believe in religion, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything, that humans have a propensity to believe in something. And religion and religiosity is really kind of decreased from society. People today are far less religious, it would seem, but maybe they still have belief, but believe in other things. Tell me about the necessity or the importance of spirituality.
Well, it was Chesterton, of course, who said that people will, believe in anything. I think that I guess what I mean by spirituality is not necessarily, organized religion,
Right.
because I think organized religion is very much, I think, under the grips of the same sort of processes that we're seeing at work in the wider world. I think for me, when I think of the spiritual, what I mean by that is the intuitive aspects of life. What religions often have done, especially to those who, people, the kinds of people who became mystics, monks, people who, would sort of go out into the wilderness, right, and spend time in solitude and so on, is that it awakens a kind of a deeper intuition in people. And I think it's this intuitive aspect that we, have come to neglect, in the modern world.
Faith and the gut and belief and these things that cannot be rationally explained.
But they can also be developed and exercised. I guess that's what we've lost. The idea that the irrational, or what we consider to be some, irrational or superstition, were once, certainly in previous ages, objects of discipline.
And that's what makes us most human, I think. Because computers and ChatGPT and all of these things can be rational, but they cannot be instinctive. They cannot be emotional. They cannot tie into something that doesn't make sense. But as humans, we do that all the time, which I think is lovely. I try to live by that. Yoonsuk, spirituality in the modern world? I mean, does this sound like, oh, God? Or how is the world less spiritual? Is it less religious than your parents' generation? Or do you have a take on... Do you sit around with your friends and talk about spirituality?
Not really, because most of my friends would like to talk about like scientific reasons or like facts that are like on the news kind of thing, like the facts. But only like 2 or 3 people around my like 10 people, 10 out of 3 would believe in God or be religious. But I was religious, but I don't think I'm religious as I was before now. What I have felt I have changed is that I don't really open the like 가능성?
Possibility?
Yeah, possibility for another things like beyond our rationals. Like for example, when I was very religious, I would think that like in this world there would be things that I cannot understand, but like the upper God would understand because I'm a human. But now I only believe in scientific facts or like statistics kind of thing. But I think that I became more like dry thinker, like non-emotional. But most of my friends are like that. So modern society is not really religious or like spiritual.
I wonder if there's an MBTI that has a propensity to be more religious than others, because there's something between T and F, isn't it?
I guess.
Which one would be the more religious one? Because non-TI is like a derogatory comment, isn't it? But which one do you think would be more religious, the T or the F or the...
Maybe I would say like there are like S and N, right?
Okay, that's right. So yeah, good.
I think that N would be the one who would be more religious, because they have tendency to like see the forest in like not the tree itself. So they have more imagination and they contemplate a lot in their daily life. So I think that N would be the one.
Be great to go to churches and temples and do a study of those people MBTIs and see if so I wonder, just listening to Yonsei, I think you're very brave to talk about your own sort of spiritual journey or the lack of it, whether we're born spiritual but then it's educated out of us, or it's society, it socializes us in such a way to remove that element. That maybe it might naturally be there. We might believe. I had the conversation, should I teach my kids about Santa Claus? Should I do that? And how do I approach that? Because I did in the end, and we stayed up and we put the cookie and the milk down. But I could have said that's not rational and that's not science, and I could have avoided that. Maybe we educate, or we're socializing spirituality out of people. Sure. One of the things that we sometimes talk about, Peter, and we might, I don't know if we disagree, but we talk about whether the modern world, with its freedoms given to various people, the progressiveness, is a good thing or a bad thing, or how that's playing out. And I don't profess to have the answer to this, but sorry, you want to say something?
Oh, well, I think liberalism is really, liberalism is what, based on the idea that individuals should be free to, live their lives in ways that they see fit. As long as, they don't break the law, of course. But I think liberalism has sort of entered a very different stage. I would have considered, I considered myself a liberal in my younger years, but it was a very different kind of liberalism. from I think what I see liberalism has become in the present, and that is that when people wanted to cultivate their freedom, and pursue like what they really what they desired to pursue, back in the old days, it didn't come with the expectation that society would approve of you, right? I mean, in fact, it was recognized as a kind of, people recognized that there was a kind of trade-off, right? That if you wanted to live in a way that was expressive, that was, faithful, to your nature or to your aspirations, it would mean coming up against, convention, right? But that was the price that you paid for freedom, right? But nowadays, I sense that the idea of personal freedom and social approval have become like it seems that people have come to identify or expect social approval almost as a kind of entitlement, which I think creates a very different kind of situation, right? Because in the past, people were able to then recognize, well, I'm living this kind of life. You don't have to say that it's good, but but thank you for giving me the space to be able to live this life. Yeah. Right. Nowadays, I think people want, there's a kind of expectation that of wanting their choices to be validated, to be accepted by others, which in a way I think reflects a loss of belief in their own freedom, right? That people don't seem to value freedom or really what freedom means in the real sense nowadays as much, and so, I mean, I think, like liberalism, certainly like in the sense that I was talking about in the past, I think is associated with living in a very dynamic, energetic, enterprising society, right? Where, people have many different kinds of ideas and outlooks and worldviews, and yet they were all able to somehow make it work, make things work without stepping on each other's toes too much, right? And people were willing to give each other, the benefit of the doubt. Right, but I think what we've lost and what makes liberalism, I think, different today is the loss of this ability to give other people the benefit of the doubt. Right, that if you don't, like the idea that someone might withhold approval is seen as a kind of violence, right? Almost the act of an enemy.
So not only, I think this is all tying back to the idea of greatness, because we've lost the ability to dislike. We've lost the ability to say, well, that's you, that's fine. But I disagree with it. I don't like it. And I think that's become harder and harder. It's sort of positive vibes only. You have to recognize and support everyone. And greatness is often achieved by people who are loved and disliked in equal measure sometimes. Rick Rubin, the music producer, said, good art divides. It sort of creates this intense feeling in some people positively and in others negatively, but now it's sort of like a catch-all acceptance. I remember talking to I say this very quickly, one of the students at Hanyang University, and she was disappointed because the university wasn't recognizing their LGBT group. And she wanted advice from me, and I said, who cares if they recognize you or not? You're still you. It doesn't and I tried to get across that they don't define you. You are who you are, and you shouldn't live for other people's approval or acceptance, because not everybody approves of this economic theory or this international relations theory or this religion or spirituality. You should be doing what you want to do and you believe is right, irrespective of other people's opinions. And she looked at me and she said, and I could feel that she didn't understand or agree with what I was saying. As passionately as I tried to convince her, we sort of, I feel people want approval or acceptance a bit more now.
Yeah, and what kind of astonishes me is they seem to make very little distinction between genuine support and fake approval, right? And so I guess I'm often shocked at how little consideration there is to the possibility that someone might be just feeding you a line. And certainly, growing up, I mean, that was something that we were taught as young people to beware of, right? And also we were taught, well, corporations will, feed you a line in order to take your money, right? So there's this kind of an eagerness to believe that any kind of external, it's weird. We've lost the category of flattery and lip service in a society where, all attention, all publicity is good publicity, means that we lose the ability, or people seem to lose the ability to distinguish, between genuine support and then flattery. Yeah.
Which is a sad thing. Does this affect you in academia in any way? What I'm trying to play this out, because we're talking sort of very abstractly at the moment, sort of going into classrooms, being around young people, having these things. Do you see impacts in your day-to-day life on the university campus or?
Well, I've noticed that people are students have become a bit more hesitant, than in the past to say what they think, or even to ask questions. And so I guess the unfortunate consequence is that I wind up having to talk a lot more, which for me is a lot less fulfilling experience of the classroom, because I really want to hear what the students themselves have to say, and get their views on life, and also get a sense of what kind of future that they're going to build. So it does create a kind of chilling effect, and it's interesting. Alexis de Tocqueville, the French philosopher who traveled through the United States, predicted this, right? That in a society that values equality, right, eventually people will give up asking difficult questions, right? They will just think, oh, it's just beyond me. I'm just one small person, right? I don't want to cause trouble. It's just better if I don't ask these questions at all. Right, and I think that's happening on a pretty broad scale, right? And then on the other side, you get the incredibly angry and hostile world that you encounter online, for example. I think which is kind of the other of this, right? So that we're not able to establish a kind of healthy balance, between the two.
Yeah.
And I think this is also one of the most troubling signs of our times.
Does it not allow people to rise to the top more easily? If everybody thinks they're equal and they're going to not ask the difficult questions and they're not going to speak, they're going to self-censor, that if someone does have the courage and the bravery to say, I'm going to do this, I want to do this. One of our last guests was Soa, and she said, I want to be this, I want to go on television. And if you're driven and you believe, and I tell my students, even if you just read one book, that's probably one book more than your counterparts, right? Does it make it easier for some people to rise up amidst the equality?
I think it makes it easier, but it depends on the context and the audience. So I think it's probably impossible to for someone who is independent, really reflects very deeply and really challenges the dominant values of today to have a political career. Yeah. Right. So people like that, I think, are generally they vent their frustration on Twitter or X. But then, on the other hand, you do see some, YouTubers and influencers who have achieved incredibly, huge audiences, right, by asking and exploring these questions. But again, they're cut off though from, I guess, from the sort of the mainstream of society. So our society doesn't really have a kind of a center anymore. Perhaps in the past, there would have been some, ways for talented people, to have this kind of crossover success, right, where they might move from, sort of this more indie world, right, to the mainstream world. But the mainstream world, I think, has become completely dominated, by corporate interests, so as to make this kind of crossover really, pretty much close to impossible.
Yeah. Some people said that fame used to be a spectrum. It used to be binary. You were famous or you were not famous. You were a celebrity or not celebrity. But now we've sort of entered this spectrum world where you can be YouTube famous and you can have sort of millions and millions of fans, but you could walk down the street and many people would not know who you are because you said we don't have a center anymore. It's almost as if mainstream has disappeared. We used to watch the same television shows by dint of there was one television in the house, and we used to listen to the same music because there was a few radio stations. But now I think, and this was a similar idea, that maybe there's not greatness anymore because I have my music that I think is great, you have yours, and that mainstream has disappeared. There's nothing to hold us together. So whereas God is dead, the loss of a single truth or a uniting idea, that mainstream is also dead, and we're sort of all retreated into our individual worlds.
Yes, but I think there are a lot of people who are trying to arrive at a better understanding of where we are. Yeah. And I can imagine that some of these YouTubers would, if not become the mainstream of the next society, would actually, play a very big role in bringing about, sort of the next, the next, the sort of the set of changes I think that we'll be going through.
Yeah. Research and studies, I'll come to you about equality in a minute, Yoonsuk. Research and studies show that people are more likely to be influenced by YouTubers than professors or family or things like this because they speak in a language that they understand and they recognize. It doesn't seem scripted like corporate world. It doesn't come from your parents where you kind of sometimes turn off and go, yeah, mum, all right. But it comes from somebody that feels like you're speaking to you and has great influence, these YouTube, social media people. How important, Yonsei, is equality? We've been talking a little bit about equality, and since I've seen you, in university, in the classroom, you've had to interact with different people of sort of races and genders and sexualities and all of that. How does equality work for young people?
I think that nowadays modern people confuse between like equality and like all the same amount of price or something, because like let's say there is a child who's very short and there is an adult like who's very tall, then we should give a child a taller letter because they have to be equal. But nowadays people are like, why don't you give me the same letter as that child? That's unfair. They're going this way. So I think that nowadays people are not really ready for the equality to come, and they should learn more, because for genders and sexualities they think that, oh, like women should be like treated differently. Oh no, like women should be treated like more nicely because they are like, you know, the differences, or about the genders. But as I said before, some people don't really take the equality as the given thing, so they should given the same amount of prize or like the givings as the disabled or like discriminated people. So I think that modern people, especially young people, should learn more about equality.
What equality means. In my last conversation, which I did online with Dr. Yoonsuk, who did stuff on neoliberalism, in her book, she said that when they were arguing in South Korea whether there should be free lunches for children or not, there was the argument that it should be free lunches for everybody or free lunches for the needy children. And as I was reading, I was thinking, of course, free lunches for the needy children. Why would you give it to the children of Yangban or chaebol owners or things like this? Doesn't make sense. And then in the book, it went on to say, people argued that it should be given to all children because there are no rich or poor children. There are only rich and poor parents, and children shouldn't be learned to discriminate at a young age between these things. And I read that and I went, oh my God, I agree with that. I've just changed my mind. In like one paragraph, that, you know, should we differentiate in our treatment and give them different sized ladders so they reach the same outcome? Or should we give everybody the same thing? And there's different opinions, I think, on how we go with equality, how we treat people. Do we treat people the same? Do we give special dispensation? Students will ask me, I have ADHD, international students, can I have extra time on my tests? And I generally say no.
Well, there's a Belgian poet named Henri Michaud, whose works are have a kind of a surrealist aspect to them. And he imagines this society where a few children are removed and then treated extremely harshly, you know, throughout their childhood, right, brutalized, right. And he says that out of this group of kids come the leaders of the military, right. It makes the army of this country invincible. Also, the greatest writers, you know, who outshine the writers of all the other countries, but also the worst criminals, the most terrifying and cruel and violent, reprobates, right? So I think that I think maybe what we miss when we, in our valorization of equality, is that sometimes unequal treatment actually produces both. It produces, negative effects, but it can produce also outstandingly positive effects as well.
The democracy is the safest of all the options, isn't it? It's the least likely to lead to tyranny or something like that, because you might have a leader that you despise, but in 6 months there'll be new polls and there'll be a midterm and then another election, and so
I would say it's safest in the short run, but it's probably the most dangerous in the long run. Because again, like, there's no incentive for the leadership to really, or very little incentive for the leadership to think, according to a larger time frame. And so I think that's also kind of an interesting, contest, I think, that we see taking place. I mean, like, if authoritarianism has the advantage, it could reside precisely in the ability of an authoritarian political system to plan long term, right? Whereas democracies seem to have lost that capacity.
Completely agree. The Chairman Kim Jong-un and Chairman Xi, they're thinking 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, we're thinking November and things like this. They do plan long time, and they probably do speak about greatness. They do speak about achieving incredible human feats. A lot of that might be sort of propaganda, but they try to raise the bar of what is possible, and I'm sure it will create some greatness. And like in this Belgian poet's example, might create great military, great art, but then it might create some very despondent and dark lives as well.
Yes.
Do you get a sense about the East and the West? Does the East and the West still exist? I notice a vast difference between when I'm teaching a university classroom full of Korean people and then international students predominantly. I remember reading one of your pieces, and you were talking a little bit about Edward Said, and you've spoken about Spengler as well. Do the East and the West still exist? Are there different cultures here? Has globalization brought them together?
I mean, I think one thing that has surprised me is how little, actually, how, in terms of influence, how powerful the West has grown, even as Western society seems to be undergoing a collapse. Like it's like, for example, during the Iraq War, you had like a series of books come out that that spoke of that argued that the United States was, as a result of the war, would lose global influence, and that much of the moral authority, and also economic power of the globe would shift over to Western Europe. Right? That hasn't happened. In fact, the opposite, has happened since then. Now, similarly, I thought that as Korean popular culture and Korean TV shows and film would spread all over the globe, that Korean society would then try to rediscover perhaps what makes it particularly Korean. But I don't really see that happening. I mean, of course, my view is very, very limited, and there are probably efforts somewhere that that I've overlooked. But it seems to me that, broadly speaking, like there's been kind of a less of an effort, I think, on the part of the alternative to actually present itself as as mapping a possible future, or influencing the future moving forward. Right? It's still very much the American cultural hegemony. At a time when American culture seems to have largely broken down and vanished. Right? And so what does that mean for the rest of the world if it takes such a takes the United States, where the imagination of the country, the sort of the collective imaginary, I don't think really exists anymore. Like what happens if if Korea or other countries take that kind of country that is undergoing a kind of cultural revolution as its model? I mean, will it simply, will it wind up importing a lot of the problems that the United States has undergone, to these places, or might there be a point where people do kind of, wake up and realize, oh, well, we have to chart our own course? It seems to me that there's a real disinclination, resistance to the idea of charting a course independent of the United States.
Do you think that comes from cultural hegemony, like economic imperative, a lack of courage? I mean, because maybe you want to chart your own path, but you need money, or you need to interact in the world. No nation is an island, perhaps.
Oh yes, I think finance is a big part, I think, of the explanation. But but still, I mean, like you would have obviously, where are the people who are critical of finance? I mean, where are the people who would have in the past called for criticism and resistance to neoliberalism? I mean, all that seems to have pretty much dried up, in my view, precisely at the time when neoliberalism is collapsing.
Yeah. That's interesting, because we also sort of see, to some extent, although I don't know how deeply it is, a neoliberalization of societies that we would assume to be the opposite. You see, some of my Chinese students, they're incredibly focused on individuality and wealth and personal gain and profit. So even the countries that are meant to, or the cultures, the civilizations that are meant to be the opposition, are also going down that route. That there is no alternative, with the end of history, the end of ideology, or something like this. You spoke a little bit about how Korean culture might be changing. You are of Korean heritage, Peter?
Yes.
And you first came here sort of, I'm going to get my biographical details wrong here, so maybe it would be better of you. But I just thought it would be interesting to see how you've seen life in Korea over the last sort of 5-6 years, and what you've made of it in the day-to-day existence.
Yes, well, I was actually born in Seoul and left for the United States when I was 4, and then came back, over 40 years later. I mean, it's a very different country, from what I remember as a toddler, and certainly what my parents, remember, from the time that, from the time in the past when they grew up and lived here. Let's see. So I guess I mean, on the one hand, I mean, it's a very hyper-modern society. A lot of things are extremely convenient. It's very easy, I think, to get used to, at some level because of that. I mean, and then, of course, there are other things like the great freedom to walk around without having to worry about, crime or violence or terrorism. I mean, that is incredibly precious. And I wish that Koreans, could somehow appreciate that more. I mean, like whenever I go back to the U.S., I mean, I always feel like I have to then, harden myself and be much more wary of where I am and try to take, assess, is this area dangerous or not? And that's and the more I go back, I mean, the more I realize what a terrible burden that is on people. I mean, like if you think that, your public spaces are not safe, right? One thing that does is it makes people, it actually depoliticizes people. It reduces political participation, right? I think it creates a kind of, kind of a constant low-level stress, right? And it's, it's wonderful to be able to live in a place where you're, largely free of that. I mean, of course, there's the threat of, obviously of North Korea and, but again, I mean, on a day-to-day level, right? People are able to do their business and go about, their lives without that element of fear. Which I mean, it's really sad to see it spreading across, so many places, not just the U.S., but also, in Europe, for example.
I love here that there'll be parks and they're safe and they're free and there's exercise machines outside and they're maintained and they're well kept. They're not the highest technology that you'll find in a gym, but the outside public spaces, they're clean, they're safe, they're well maintained, and they're used regularly. You'll see old people always out there doing their things as I run by the river, and I think maybe that's subconsciously, even if not consciously, playing a role in nurturing or continually cementing that civic society, that collectivism, that this is our space. It belongs to us. These are our exercise things.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, some people will, think about the protests in Gwanghwamun as excessively noisy or whatever. But I think it's also a sign of the health of the political system that people, feel free to go out and express their opinions, right? I think it's a very healthy thing.
Yeah. No, it's good because 30, 40 years ago, it was dangerous. I've had people on here that have been shot at for protesting, or we've talked about people in prison for writing books. Have you ever been to a protest?
Not really, because in like candle lighting protest,
Yeah.
I was elementary schooler.
Okay.
But my homeroom teacher went to the Gwanghwamun.
Yeah.
And she told us about the experiences there. But teachers aren't really allowed to talk about that because it might be controversial for teachers. So, but she told us like very briefly about that. But there were like all the people there, all strangers, but they just gained there and support each other and go for the same goal. But they did not really feel the threat as we learned from the history books, like in the like long away past.
Your ancestors in the 1980s.
No, not the ancestors.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even nowadays we can post SNS about like thoughts on governments freely, and we don't really get threat about that.
Yeah. Do you want your professors to be political? For example, you've taken many classes with me, and I would probably say that some students would have a hard time understanding where I am politically, because I go all over the spectrum with ideas and content. From a student's perspective, do you want your professors to be political, or do you generally understand, or this is Bosudang, this is Minjudang Gyosu, or do you prefer it to be removed from personal politics?
I assume that in my major,
Yeah.
professors don't really want to show their preferences because they're afraid that we would learn like one side of the government or the spectrum. So they intentionally don't really say about their thoughts on governments or society as like one side. If they should speak about one side, they also speak about another side. And for me, I think that would be good because as a student, I think that professors are right, like 99%. So I would just follow their thoughts during the class. So I appreciate them saying both of the sides or in the like middle side. I appreciate them doing that.
Yeah. One of the things, it's very powerful of you to say that, Yonsei, Peter, as well, one of the things that I found in South Korea, in universities here, I don't have to worry about getting people's pronouns right or wrong, right? With my Korean students in the class, I have to really worry about making sure I give their grades fairly and transparently. Because if I'm judged to have been favoritism to a certain student or done this, I know they would kick out presidents for that, or justice ministers. You know, they believe very heavily in discrimination, but not in terms of gender or sexuality, but in terms of education and fairness and transparency. You mentioned the beauty of safety and civic society here. Any thoughts on the Korean education system or how you're experiencing that?
Yeah, many of the Korean students that I have are from international schools, so I think their education tends to be more similar to Western education. I mean, from what I know about the Korean education system, that there is a great deal it creates a great deal of misery, but it's also very egalitarian, right? And there are a lot of efforts to make sure that that everyone is treated fairly. Right.
Yeah.
Of course, it gets sort of course, wealthier families, send their children to, like hagwons, after school tutoring, and so on. But I think it's really striking how much of an emphasis on fairness there is. I mean, of course, one would like to lighten the burden, I think, of Korean students, but at the same time, I think this emphasis on treating everyone equally seems to hinder that.
Let me ask you a question for advice then, because I've put this to my students at the end of the semester. I generally try to teach to a level where the majority of students will understand it. And then this creates a system where some students receive A's, because they understand it to different levels. And I say to them, I wonder what would happen if I just taught to the highest level possible and then really tries to raise those, if I really push students. Because I know some students get everything that I'm saying and it's kind of easy for them. Not too easy, but, and I sometimes wonder, should I just teach to the top 4 or 5 and then just push those? Because that would be a very different outcome. I would get very different evaluations rather than teaching to the group and trying to take them all along for the 15, 16-week semester. Have you ever come across that thought in your own mind, or how do you navigate that teach to the middle, teach to the top?
Yeah, when I was teaching in the U.S., this was quite a challenge because we had the range of student ability was the range in their abilities was really quite broad. So I had students who were extremely bright, could have been at Ivy League schools, right, as well as those who kind of barely made it out of high school. Now, how do you teach, like a classroom with both sets of students? I mean, I think I don't know. I guess I it hasn't really. But then when I came to Korea, I did notice that, and I did appreciate the fact that I could teach material at a more sophisticated level, without as much worry about what the less prepared students would have to deal with. I think it's. I don't know. It's. I mean, I guess I'm not really the type to really to try to drive students. I mean, to push them really hard. Maybe I should, or maybe I think that I'm pushing them hard already anyway. But but I don't know. I mean, I think I really hope that no matter how where the student is, I mean, I would want him or her to get something out of the class. I mean, maybe there are ways of varying your lessons, to shift gears, occasionally. Maybe I don't know. Maybe that's something I should try more often. I mean, thanks for the idea.
Yeah, shift gears maybe before and after a break or something like that in a 3-hour lecture or between weeks and alternate. Yeah, it's very interesting because I still don't know the answer, and I want the best students to achieve amazing things. And by the same token, I want to make sure that all students get something from it. That it's not, I have found the educational levels here to be quite high. In general, that students have a great grasp of sort of reading and writing. A lot of them are doing it in their second language with me by the same token, and I have incredible respect for the education, although it does create misery here. It's hard, but we're saying through misery you create greatness, isn't it? You put this Belgian poet. I'm fascinated. I'm going to go and read this Belgian poet. In terms of greatness, I was looking at your research, Peter, and you've done a lot on cinema and Hallyu content, not necessarily K-pop, but you've written about Bong Joon-ho's work, and we've discussed Parasite in the past together. Do you have anything to say about Korean cinema or Korean movies, about Bong Joon-ho, Park Chan-wook, or any of these things based on your writing?
Let's see. My research has shifted a bit away from Korean cinema these days. Although I am actually planning to write an article on Burning by Lee Chang-dong. And Burning seems to me to present a kind of dilemma, I think, within like South Korean culture, I think, as a whole. I mean, it's a film that is, of course, based on two short stories, one by William Faulkner and the other by Haruki Murakami, and then it has one of the main characters, of course, is a Korean American, right, who might be a serial killer. Right, the film never fully, of course, establishes, in an unambiguous way, what he is. But at the same time, the film seems to be lost as to how to depict, such a character, right? And I think it encapsulates, I think, the sort of the problem of moving from one stage of modernity to the next, right? That on the one hand, the director Yi is really taking risks, right? He's venturing into territory that is new and fresh, that's very different from anything that he's done before. On the other hand, it's hard not to come away feeling that he's a bit lost, right, in terms of how to resolve the action and how to develop this character. And I think I think the sort of the dilemma that he's caught in is it what. I think he's good at depicting, like, for example, evil carried out by characters for the sake of gain, right? But then what about evil that is carried out for its own sake, right? Without the idea of gain in mind, right? So when people do terrible things in South Korean cinema, it's usually because they were treated badly, or it's because they want money, right? But here is a character who just does terrible things, right? Just because.
Some
right?
people just want to watch the world burn, or something like that.
Yes, I mean, like, he's a figure of radical evil, and it's interesting to watch, the director try to wrap his mind around it. I mean, for example, like when he's in his element, like in the film Hanyang or Secret Sunshine, which I consider to be a masterpiece. Right, you really he takes the film into this really interesting sort of theological territory on the question of forgiveness, right? Which is in a way that is I think I haven't really come across any other work that reflects so profoundly, on the meaning of forgiveness. But then in Burning, it's almost as though the world has changed, and he can't find his footing in that world. And I think maybe that this might be the next. I think a film like Burning might signal the next set of themes and dilemmas that South Korean film and television might be grappling with. Again, like, and by that I mean perhaps it may it might be dealing with maybe the disappearance of what is Korean. When Korean society becomes completely globalized, right, completely modern, and any kind of vital tie to the past has been lost, right? The Marxist critic Frederick Jameson, defines, for example, modernism in art as the art of when there were many traces of the pre-modern past in the modern world, right? And so, like the French poet Apollinaire could write about airplanes, but also about cathedrals, right? And so you had the pre-modern or the 19th century world alongside the 20th century world, and the 20th century, of course, is presented as so really. Highlights the newness of the 20th century. But what he calls postmodernism is when all these traces of the past basically lose all meaning, right? And that we no longer have any kind of vital tie to the past. So that postmodernism is only the modern, right? And perhaps we might be, that this, I think, is the kind of the great, sort of civilizational dilemma, I think, for Korea, is in stepping into this new world, right? How much of the past will stay vital and meaningful, and if not, then what new things, or maybe even archaic things, might be waiting on the other side of this, of this transformation.
And I think it's an excellent point, and I think one of the things that differentiates Korea and other countries' civilizations from somewhere like Western Europe or North America is that the colonial experience. And here also the division, it ruptures the past. And so when they look into the past, they don't have this seamless continuation, because that period of 35 years where a lot of modernity was achieved with trams and banks and for the benefit of the Japanese Empire predominantly, but they have to almost disavow that. And so they're trying to rebuild synapses or these connections, and that requires a lot of fudging, and should we do it here or should we do it here? It's not seamless. And when you talk about Korea's past, it's like, what past? The past of the Joseon dynasty with slavery and a caste system, or the 1930s where it was developing and modernizing? It's really difficult, Korea's past.
Yes, but I think that I think of people with a long history, perhaps, will, I think, experience this kind of crisis, possibly differently. I mean, you also have the Buddhism of was it the Koryo dynasty?
Yeah.
Also, the greater openness to the outside world at the time. But today, it's like how much of that might be available as a resource. I'm not quite sure. But I think it's a question that I think will become more pressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, defining what Korea is, what Korean culture is. Does it exist? I mean, you asked that question on this podcast. I've asked young people about things like Han, which will appear in textbooks, and they're like, no, that's rubbish. Like, so certain elements have already been discarded. Mm-hmm. Is there I'll just push you on this, what is Korean culture today? Is there a Korean culture? How do you perceive Korea today in its position, culturally, spiritually?
Well, that's a huge question, very difficult to answer. Well, I mean, I think if I start at an everyday level, I mean, there's a certain sense in which things still feel kind of familiar and Korean. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe not so much in looking at the art or the music, or, K-pop or movies or whatever. Maybe it comes across a bit more in the dramas, but I think in the way that people interact with each other on a daily level, obviously there's a difference between here and the West, right?
What's one of those differences? How you perceive it?
I think it's a kind of a mixture of both familiarity and formality. That there's a greater level of formality in everyday interaction, but there are also ways in which a kind of underlying affection can somehow, make itself felt, right? Or unexpected generosity, and it's, I think, in these small gestures that I sense something kind of deeply rooted. That this is maybe what was able to hold people, keep people together, throughout a very long history.
Sounds like Jong.
Yeah, I guess it is. I guess you could say that it's Jong. Maybe Korea's greatest hope lies in the sort of the residues of this Jong. I mean, but at the same time, I guess I haven't really quite sensed as much of an effort among Koreans to really sort of assess their place in the world. And perhaps doing so might actually result in the tapping into certain cultural resources that that might prove very beneficial. I mean, why is Korea so popular, right? Why are Korean television dramas seen across the world? What is it that makes people want to come here? I mean, as tourists. I mean, certainly when I was in high school and college, I mean, the only people in the United States who had any interest in going to Korea were Korean Americans who wanted to visit their relatives. Right. I mean, it was very hard. I mean, that's one of the greatest changes that that has taken place over the past couple of decades, is seeing tourism like really increase, and Korea becoming a destination for tourists. But at the same time, maybe this is where the sort of the lack of I mean, if I think if Korea had an empire at one point and had colonized other people, it might grasp this the significance of this change more quickly. Yeah. Right. But Korea has it's been a while, I suppose, since Korea has really sort of acted in the outside world, and when of course it has, it was always in relation to foreign invasions or in relation to the Chinese Empire, and so on. But perhaps that there is something really new about Korea's position in the world today, and I don't think that there's been enough consideration or examination of what this actually means. I mean, perhaps this might be the path towards thinking about Korea as its own entity, without being overshadowed by the legacy of the Japanese past, or the influence of the United States, or the influence of China, right? That South Korea can somehow come into its own, right? To define itself without having necessarily the relation apart, having defining the relations at a second stage, right?
I wonder, it's an amazing idea whether South Korea can be a symbol of change and resistance and new horizons, or whether by the same token, it might just become an extension of an American colony. I use that word very flippantly, but in terms of the westernization and Americanization of Korean society here. Yoonsuk, modern Korea, like this country to you, even Peter said this question was hard, so you don't have to feel too burdened by it. But this country today, how do you see it? What is it? Where is it?
I would describe the society as a word mirror, because people like to pose or dress up in front of the mirror in the way they would like to be seen. But the one that sees the most of the most of the time, the people who see the mirror is themselves. So people are focused on themselves instead of others. So like the reason why younger people are on SNS more and more is that they are eventually interested in themselves, because, oh my God, how would I seen with this profile picture? Or like, oh, I would be seen like this way if I just hang out with these people, or like if I act this way, they would achieve me as this kind of person, kind of thing. So eventually, if we do like things out of us, but we are looking in the mirror, conclusionally, I think.
Korea is still a bit self-obsessed. If we extend that token, it's still thinking about itself. Very quickly, Chong?
Chong?
Yeah.
I think the Chong still exists, I think. But like it's not very, not very philosophical, heavy written Chong thing. It's very subtle. Like, for example, when I'm with my friends, I would think about her and I would care for her, even if I'm busy or tired. Then that's the minimum amount of Chong. And if I would like say thank you to stranger for like holding elevators or like holding doors, that would be mini Chong. Or like we can experience like Chong from family or our loved ones or best friends. Yes, so it still exists.
I believe it still exists, or it can still exist. It can still be acted out. It's an invisible hug. It's the bestowing of a small gift or an arm around the shoulder. I think Chong is a wonderful thing. Yeah. We missed this thing. I'm sorry that I skipped over it very quickly, Peter. But when you were talking about movies, you were talking about Burning, and you consider some of Director Lee's work a masterpiece and things like that. I feel very similarly about Korean cinema, incredibly deeply. My research is moving that way now. And during the summer, I taught a course in Korean cinema. And so for 4 weeks, every day, the students came in. When they sat down, I pressed play. And we watched it. And after about a couple of weeks, I had some of these young people in there, these young women, they were looking at me going, what are you doing to us, Professor? These movies, they're like emotionally tearing us apart, because, I mean, Burning is very ambiguous and you're left unresolved and you're left with this very kind of tap-tapan feeling. And Korean cinema seems to, I believe, we started this conversation talking about greatness. It seems to do things with greatness. I think it approaches greatness in many ways as auteurs trying to create a vision that they want to do. But what I also wanted to speak about this, because we've discussed education, was that I noticed the value in having people sit down and watch a movie together. And it felt like I was cheating at first, so I never wanted to do it, because I wanted to show students. And then I had this course, and slowly I've been doing it in my other courses as well, where I'm saying, we're going to watch a movie. So we're going to watch The Matrix, or we're going to watch this. And the act of sitting together in a shared space and watching it is very different from Netflix at home with your phone and being distracted. And then talking about it afterwards, I've found to be revelationary recently in creating something. Any thought? I don't know if I'm trying to persuade you to watch movies with your students. Do you do that?
Let's see. I guess during COVID, it was kind of was impossible to get people together, to watch movies. Unfortunately, my university doesn't really seem to have the resources, for that. We would watch the film outside of class time, I've only done it over over Zoom, and then we'd have maybe a little bit of chit chat afterwards. But you're right. There's something really powerful, about getting a group of people together, all experiencing, the film at the same time, right? And then having someone then to, with whom to share your reflections and your experience.
Yeah. Sharing the same physical space and doing those things, there's a great power to it. Just coming towards the end of this, Peter, can we survive AI? Can we survive social media, instant access to pornography, excessive narcissism, X and Twitter and fighting and cancel culture? Do we come out of this the other side great and driven by these people that rise to the occasion, or do you share a little bit more fear, or how do you see the future playing out in your crystal ball?
Well, I'm not quite sure how to begin with this. Sure. I think there are many dangers. I think to the kind of technological advances that are becoming everyday realities. I think also possibly there might be a risk of the technology sort of coming apart and then sort of exposing us to an environment that we are not prepared for. I think that is actually an actual danger, especially as it seems that people are growing less and less intelligent. I mean, not only are they becoming less and less, as people become more superficial, I think the less capable they also become of being able to maintain, like the incredibly complex environment that is necessary, for them to live. So perhaps AI is an attempt to kind of create a kind of an to automate the system so that we can simply go to seed, while the system will then keep the subways running and keep the food coming in, and so on. But I think human beings are. I think we have a desire. I think we are creative. I think we have the desire to. To seek things out and to experience things for ourselves. I think we have intense curiosity, and I think so that does. I think there's always hope. I mean, I think there's always light in no matter what kind of situation in which you might in which we might find ourselves, right? I mean, it was in what's called the Dark Ages, for example, that Europe established its universities. It was in periods of, certainly of despair that a great religion might emerge, and I think there is a kind of an appetite. I think I mean, and it could be maybe from a distant part of the world, right, where again a remote part of the world that it may not be as developed, where many of these breakthroughs might come. So and again, I mean, also, but of course these things can happen across a very long time frame as well. So I think it's important to kind of appreciate, obviously, the things that we're able to enjoy and often take for granted, like air conditioners, refrigeration, right? Public transportation, and so on. But also, I think this gives us a lot of space in which to really explore our minds. I mean, maybe the sad thing is that people are just simply not taking the opportunities that the tremendous opportunities that they have, to reflect and think about where we are and where we're headed. I mean, I think the people, if more people do so, I mean, obviously, the greater the sort of control I think that we can take of the future, and the greater say that people outside of the elites can have. Right. So I think this is also, these periods of stress are also periods of creativity, and I think we're entering into one of these periods where we could wind up having very different ideas about the world, in maybe 10, maybe even 5 years.
I see it coming too. It might not be 10, it might be 5, it might be 30 or 40, but I share. Peter, you have a wonderful depth of analysis. You take notes by hand. We were admiring your book here before. Do you have any advice for people on how to get away from social media a little bit, to put the phone down? And because you were saying for people to think about the situation and to contemplate it a bit more, it's not easy. We have maybe the advantage in that we grew up going on car rides and things without smartphones, so we're a little bit more accustomed. But still, it's a powerful addiction. These devices, because we want to see ourselves, as Yonsei was saying. Yeah. We're looking for ourselves in there often, not other people. Do you have any advice on how we slow down a little bit?
Well, I mean, I take great delight in actually seeing Korea. I mean, there are beautiful mountains and landscapes, and even on my regular bus ride to the university, right? I mean, I go for a walk along a canal and watch the birds, and can try to get a sense of what what might be coming in the air, what's in the air, and also I think the people who have built Seoul and run Seoul have tried to make the city really in many respects very beautiful. So I would say it might be a little hard at first, but try to notice the things around you. I mean, it's not like, yes, I mean, thinking is one kind of activity that is necessary, but I think also just as necessary is looking. Getting a sense of what's going on in the environment, and also in the lives of your fellow citizens, and your fellow human beings. Sometimes I wonder, like it's kind of funny how fortune telling is kind of like a big business in Korea.
Yeah.
But I wonder, like with this smartphone addiction, whether Korea will run out of fortune tellers, right? Because they will have lost the ability to read the signs of nature, right? And I think that is really important. I mean, I always admire how so many elderly people head to the mountains, and I think again, I mean, that provides them with this ability to connect, to something, real, to something, that that is also beautiful, that it also demands effort, from them.
Yeah.
And gives them harmony and peace in their lives, So, and yeah, I mean, I think doing things by hand is also very important. Whether it's like fixing a door, with a like a screwdriver, or learning to to use like a chisel or something like that. And certainly one big difference that writing notes has made for me is that it actually makes me look forward to work. I use fountain pens, and I love getting ink stains on my fingers. Whenever I have to put ink in them. But working with something by hand actually creates a kind of a habit that I really look forward to every day. I mean, it would be very different if I were just working on the computer. But doing something manually, I feel like I've really accomplished something. Even if that day was unproductive, it just felt good.
Yeah.
To put pen to paper.
Avoiding convenience sometimes, and taking the walk and embracing it, and using the pen and changing the ink, and then the Yunso, when we were coming over here, I told you what I was thinking of doing for my birthday in a couple of
Right.
weeks. You remember what it was?
Hiking.
And I said, Yunso, I'm getting old because it's my birthday coming up, and I'm thinking of getting people together so we can walk up a mountain. Because 4 or 5 years ago, it's like, right, we're going pubbing, and we're going to this pub, and then this pub, and this pub, and this pub, and I was like, I want to go hiking with people. And so yeah, I'm perhaps seeing similar beauty. I think we're getting old, Peter.
No, but I also agree doing things manually is also good, even if it's unproductive, because I keep my diary manually every day, every night. And it makes me feel like, oh, I've done something, like actually. Like if I wrote it with my notebook or like computer, it doesn't really feel like I did thing like from scratch, but it feels like I'm in the moment when writing diary, and I can feel it while flipping my pages, and it feels very good.
And nobody can take that away from you.
Right.
Like if a laptop breaks, or if the computer breaks, or something goes down, nobody can take your diary or your book. Yeah. Peter, today's been wonderful. We're very appreciative of the depth of your knowledge and your honesty, I think.
Thank you.
2 or 3 recommendations for the people. It can be books, movies, music, anything. Just a couple of things to throw at us.
Oh, sure. Let's see. I think in terms of a great film that has come out recently, I would recommend Under the Silver Lake, which was directed by David Robert Mitchell. He became famous for a film called It Follows, in which it's a horror film in which the monster is an STD.
I wasn't expecting that.
But Under the Silver Lake is a kind of a very interesting conspiracy tale involving Hollywood lore. It stars Andrew Garfield, and it's not a film that did really well at the box office, but I always tell people to watch it just because it not only does it create a very interesting atmosphere of what Hollywood is like today, but it also ends up saying something I think very profound about our society, and it's not afraid to say it, and it says it in a way that's actually believable. So highly recommend that film. And then I guess in terms of a book, I guess for those people who are wondering about the Cultural Revolution in the West, I think probably one of the best accounts of it is a book that came out in 1965 called The Triumph of the Therapeutic by Philip Rieff. It's an incredibly prophetic book. I think Rieff was able to predict all the sort of the major transformations of American society that would come about as in which his thesis is that self-esteem would take the center stage in people's lives, and so the focus of most people's lives would be feeling good, right? Whereas in the past, it had been some kind of commitment to the community or to God or to some other kind of purpose, higher purpose than the self. And so, I highly recommend The Triumph of the Therapeutic. And then, I guess for in terms of YouTube shows, I enjoy a series called The Y Files, which goes into such topics as UFOs, Atlantis, the possible engineering of human beings by alien races. And it's presented in a way that's actually very engaging and fun, but also manages to be at certain points actually quite it can be quite disturbing sometimes.
The word Y, the letter Y, the Y files?
WHY.
Okay, the word Y. Fantastic. Peter, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. It was great to talk.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Is the aircon working? You guys
I
feel
don't
the
think
aircon?
so.
I don't think so either. I'm sitting there going, Jesus, it's hot today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is hot today.
It is, but normally we have the aircon on. We suffered today. Thank you for suffering with us. I'm sorry things didn't run smoothly, but conversation was lovely.
Oh, yes. Yeah, don't worry about it. It's actually, when I got back to Korea, I was like this, right? And so yesterday provided much needed relief, so I can put up with more like this seemed to be.
I sometimes wonder, like my mind goes, how did people do it during the war and the Joseon dynasty, like giving birth and all of these things in the dead of winter? I had Mark Peterson on here, the famous Korean studies professor, and he first came in 1965. So I asked him, what did you do during winter? Like in 1965, he looked at me and went, we died. And then in summer, we died again. I reckon by like 2 or 3 weeks, our students from Indonesia and Singapore, they'll have their long paddings on though. They'll be cold in a couple of weeks. We adjust to different things. And so I thought you did very well today.